Hey everyone, welcome to a deep dive on something super important,
Okay.
cardiac arrest. We've got a podcast script you sent over, and wow, there's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it's something we should all be thinking about.
Right, I mean, it can happen to anyone, anytime, anywhere. That's what really struck me.
And sadly, the survival rate outside of a hospital is really low. Like really, really low.
Yeah, the script said only about 1 in 10 people make it. 1 in 10. That's pretty scary. What contributes to that?
Well, time's a big factor. Getting help fast enough, starting CPR right away. But honestly, there's just not enough awareness out there. Not enough people trained. And sometimes, well, people freeze up. They're not sure what to do.
I get that. It's a high-pressure situation. But the script makes it clear. Knowing what to do can literally be the difference between life and death. So let's break it down, starting with the basics. The script talked about the difference between a heart attack and cardiac arrest. I always get those two confused.
Yeah, it's an easy mix-up. Think of it this way. Your heart's like an engine, right?
Okay, I'm following. A heart attack? That's like a blockage somewhere in the fuel lines. Bad news, but the engine's still running. Cardiac arrest. That's like someone hit the kill switch. Everything stops.
So one's a circulation problem, the other is electrical.
Exactly.
Wow, that's a good way to remember it. But why is it so important to know the difference besides just, for trivia night?
Because the way you respond matters. Both are serious, both need medical help, but what you do first changes depending on what's happening. And with cardiac arrest, every second counts.
The script said brain damage can start in just 4 to 6 minutes without oxygen.
Yep. That's why knowing what to do is so critical. Those first few minutes, they're everything.
So let's say someone collapses right in front of me. What's step one?
First, you got to check if they're responsive at all. Give them a gentle shake, call their name, see if you get any kind of reaction.
And if nothing?
Then it's 911 time,
Okay.
immediately. Don't even hesitate. And put that phone on speaker so your hands are free.
Got it. Call 911, hands-free. Then what?
CPR. Right away.
Okay. CPR. Full disclosure, that's always kind of freaked me out. What if I mess it up?
Listen, even bad CPR is better than no CPR. The main thing is to get those chest compressions going, hard and fast, right in the center of the chest.
How fast are we talking? The script mentioned 100 compressions per minute. How am I supposed to keep track of that in the moment?
Oh, they had a great tip for that. Remember the song Sweet Home Alabama?
Wait, seriously?
Yeah. That beat, it's almost perfect for CPR timing.
That's wild. Who knew a song could be a lifesaver?
It's the little things sometimes,
Yeah.
right? But there's another tool that can be a game changer in these situations. An AED. Ever used one?
I've seen them around, but always assumed they were, complicated.
Nah, they're designed for anyone to use. They literally talk you through the whole thing, where to put the pads, when to do what.
So they're basically foolproof.
Well, nothing's ever completely foolproof, but yeah, they're made to be as simple and intuitive as possible.
Okay, that makes me feel better. So, quick recap. If someone collapses, I check responsiveness, call 911, start CPR, and use an AED if there's one around.
You got it.
But how does an AED actually work? I mean, how do they restart a heart?
That's a good question.
Mm.
It delivers a controlled electrical shock, basically hitting the reset button on all that chaotic electrical activity that's causing the cardiac arrest.
Huh. Sounds a lot simpler than I imagined.
The goal's to get the heart beating in a normal rhythm again so it can pump blood properly.
Makes sense. Though I gotta ask, I've heard CPR can sometimes break ribs. Is that something to worry about?
It's a valid concern, and yeah, sometimes it happens. But honestly, a broken rib is a small price to pay for saving a life.
True. I guess in that moment, you focus on the bigger picture.
Exactly. And once the paramedics get there, they can take care of any injuries that might have happened during CPR.
Right. So we've covered a lot. Heart attack versus cardiac arrest, acting fast, CPR, AEDs. It's clear being prepared is crucial. But I'm curious, what about the future? Are there any breakthroughs on the horizon for treating or even preventing cardiac arrests?
So there's some really cool stuff being researched. New drugs, new ways to do CPR, even wearable tech that could spot early warning signs and call for help automatically.
Wow. That's incredible.
It is. And as technology keeps advancing, we can expect to see even more innovative solutions. It's a pretty exciting time for this field.
That's really encouraging. But for now, the takeaway is awareness is key. We all need to know what cardiac arrest is, how to respond, and be willing to act quickly.
Couldn't said it better myself. Understanding this, it can truly make all the difference. And even if you never have to use these skills, just knowing you could, it gives you a sense of, empowerment.
I like that. Like you're ready, you're equipped, you could be someone's lifeline.
Exactly. And speaking of being equipped, you're already interested in this topic. What about sharing that knowledge with family, friends? Could you be an advocate in your community, spreading awareness and getting more people trained? What are the thoughts pop up for you?
Those are really good points. This has definitely got me thinking. And yes, spreading the word is so important.
It is. And that's actually a perfect segue into what we'll be exploring next, but we'll give those ideas some time to sink in for now. Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about, becoming an advocate, spreading the word about all this, creating that ripple effect.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm feeling pretty motivated now, like I could actually make a difference. But where to even start? I mean, besides learning CPR and pushing for more AEDs, what else can we do to actually shift those scary survival rates?
One thing is, we got to tackle the fear. You said it yourself, CPR kind of freaked you out. Lots of people feel that way. They worry they'll do something wrong, so they don't do anything at all.
That makes sense. I read somewhere that, like, whether someone steps in to help is often the deciding factor. It's about overcoming that hesitation, trusting your gut.
Exactly. And that's where, community stuff comes in. Imagine if CPR training was mandatory in schools, workplaces. Everyone grow up knowing it, like it's no big deal.
I love that. A society where knowing CPR is just normal, like a safety net we all have for each other.
Right. And while we're on the subject of things we should have everywhere, AEDs, the script kept coming back to how important they are. Why aren't they as common as fire extinguishers,
Seriously, you see fire extinguishers everywhere, but AEDs, tucked away in a corner if you're lucky.
It all comes down to awareness and priorities. We've been drilled on fire safety for ages, which is good, but we need that same urgency around cardiac arrest.
Totally agree. And maybe tech can help with that. The expert in the script mentioned some pretty amazing stuff on the horizon, wearables that can detect cardiac events. Wild.
Right. And think about AI systems that could, analyze data and predict problems before they even happen. Preventative measures, that's where the real game changer lies.
That sounds kind of sci-fi, but also kind of raises some ethical questions, doesn't it? Who has access to all that data? What if the predictions are wrong? A whole other can of worms.
Definitely. We can't forget about those ethical implications as tech keeps advancing. Data privacy, using it responsibly, making sure everyone benefits, not just a select few. Big stuff to think about.
It's a balancing act for sure. But at the end of the day, the goal is to use tech to help people, right?
Absolutely. And speaking of helping people, remember that statistic. 1 in 10 surviving out of hospital cardiac arrest. Well, there's tons of research going on to figure out why it's so low and what can be done.
Oh, interesting. Any particular areas of research that stand out to you?
One that's super fascinating is looking at regional differences. Like, why do some areas have higher survival rates than others? They're looking at healthcare access, economic factors, even cultural attitudes towards helping out in these situations.
So it's not just about the medical stuff, but also about the social and cultural context.
Right. There was this study that found that, communities where people look out for each other, there are more bystanders who'll do CPR. Makes you think.
It does. It's about creating this sense of shared responsibility. We're all in this together.
Exactly. And then there's research focused on fine-tuning CPR itself. Like, what's the absolute best way to do it? What's the ideal depth and rate of compressions? Can feedback devices help people do it better? They're even exploring completely different approaches to CPR.
Wow. So much is happening in this field.
It is. And it's constantly evolving. That's why staying up to date on the latest recommendations and guidelines is super important.
It's inspiring, honestly, all this work being done, new tech, community action, groundbreaking research. It really feels like we're gaining ground in this fight.
Definitely. More and more, we're recognizing that this isn't just a personal health issue, it's a public health challenge, and it takes a multifaceted approach to tackle it.
And as you said earlier, we can all be part of that.
Absolutely. Learn CPR, advocate for more AEDs, educate our communities, support the research. Every action, even the small ones, they add up.
I like that. Taking ownership, realizing we all have a role to play.
Exactly. And on that note, let's shift gears a bit. We've talked a lot about the physical side of things, the importance of quick action, all that. But there's another whole dimension we haven't really touched on. The emotional and psychological impact.
You're right. The script we've been using, it doesn't really go there. And it's something we often forget to talk about.
It's easy to get caught up in the mechanics of survival, but the emotional toll for survivors, for witnesses, even for the first responders, it can be huge.
No doubt. Seeing someone collapse, doing CPR, that wait for the ambulance, those are powerful experiences. They stick with you.
They do. And for survivors, it's not over when their heart starts beating again. They might have physical challenges, cognitive stuff, emotional scars that take time to heal.
It's a whole other layer of complexity, and it deserves our attention. And I imagine it can be especially tough for people who've lost loved ones to cardiac arrest.
Absolutely. The grief, the guilt, the questions that just linger, it can be overwhelming. And often people who are grieving, they feel so alone in it all.
That's really sad. It just highlights how important it is to have more awareness, more support systems, not just for the physical recovery, but the emotional one too.
Exactly. We need spaces where people can talk about what they're going through, process their feelings, and realize they're not alone in all this.
So for this last part of our deep dive, let's explore that side of things, the emotional landscape. We'll talk about the psychological effects, the importance of seeking help, and what resources are out there for people who've been through this, whether directly or indirectly.
Let's dive in. Shine a light on those deeper waters, the stuff we don't always see.
Welcome back, everyone. It's been quite a deep dive so far, hasn't it? We talked about the science behind cardiac arrest, how crucial it is to act fast, and even what the future might hold for treating it. But now we're shifting gears a bit. We're going to explore the emotional side of things, something we often don't talk enough about.
Yeah, it's one thing to understand the physical aspects of cardiac arrest, but the emotional impact, well, that can be just as powerful.
Absolutely. So to start us off, what are some of the psychological effects that survivors and witnesses might experience?
Well, first off, it's important to remember that everyone reacts to trauma differently, right? There's no one-size-fits-all response. That being said, anxiety, depression, even PTSD, those are pretty common. And sometimes survivors might even struggle with survivor's guilt.
Survivor's guilt. Wow, that must be a heavy thing to carry.
It can be. They start asking themselves, why me? Why did I survive when someone else didn't? It's complex, definitely something that needs support and understanding.
And for witnesses, especially those who actually helped out, I imagine it can be pretty traumatic for them too.
Absolutely. Think about it. Performing CPR, even when it's successful, that's incredibly intense. Witnesses might keep replaying the event in their heads, second-guessing themselves, just struggling with the whole emotional weight of it all.
It sounds like we need a kind of emotional first aid kit alongside the physical one we talked about earlier.
We do. And that's why reaching out for support is so important. Talking to friends and family, finding a support group, maybe working with a therapist who specializes in trauma, these can all provide a safe space to work through those feelings and learn how to cope.
You know, the script we've been talking about didn't really go into this, but it's something we felt was really important to bring up for our listeners. It's okay to not be okay after something like this, whether you're a survivor or a witness.
Exactly. Asking for help isn't a weakness, it's a sign of strength. And there are a lot of great resources out there, both online and in local communities, like the American Heart Association. They have a ton of information and support services for survivors and their families.
That's good to know. But what about witnesses who maybe weren't directly involved, but they still saw what happened?
Even observing a traumatic event can be really upsetting. Talking about it, having their feelings validated, understanding that it's a normal reaction, that can all help them process what they went through.
So it's all about being open and honest about how we feel after something like this happens?
Exactly. I think we also need to acknowledge that this isn't just about the person who went through cardiac arrest, right? It ripples out. It affects their families, their friends, the whole community.
That's such a good point. It's a shared trauma, and it needs a shared response of compassion and understanding.
Right. We need to be mindful of everyone who's hurting and make sure there are support systems in place, not just right after the event, but long-term too.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a sense of hope. Yes, cardiac arrest is serious, both physically and emotionally. But knowledge is power, taking action is key, and there's help out there if you need it.
You've learned so much. You understand this condition better now. You have the tools to potentially save a life, and you know that taking care of your emotional well-being is just as important as your physical health.
Remember, you're not alone. Whether you're a survivor, a witness, a loved one, or just someone who wants to be prepared, there are people and resources out there to help.
And as we've been saying, you can be a part of the solution. Talk about it, raise awareness, and let's work together to create a world where more people survive cardiac arrest and where everyone affected gets the emotional support they need.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. And always remember, every heartbeat matters.